Hello again, this is Jeremy and this is chess time. It is me, it's one of my games. It was a friendly game. It's Bags versus M. That's his call sign. They call him Big M. Okay, the move sequence, by the way, I'm white. So the move sequence goes E4, E5, Bobby Fischer's favorite opening, F3, knight F3, attacking the E5. He plays F5. The reason he's doing that is he's planning on after if I do take, he'll take, and then he can bring his queen or his knight. What he'll probably do is bring his knight. See, it frees up the pawn. I've been reading a book that this frees up the pawn, and it's easy development for his knight. Then he can do a kingside attack if I castle. So that's why I did that. And rather than take, because I know the folly of that, is I push my d pawn to d3, so if he takes, then I still have central control, and I won't have a problem, and it prevents the d5 push with his pawn. He moves out like we were talking about, free development. It also brings, when he castles, if he castles kingside, it'll bring the rook to that open F file to start the attack on me. But we'll see what happens. I keep developing. Sometimes the best thing to do is not to take. Good positional play. Position is really important. He plays his bishop to b4. What he's planning on doing is he's going to try to push his d pawn, or what he might do is he might take with f takes e4, and then I have to take, then he'll take and double my pawns. That might be what he does. But rather than let him do that, I move to d2. In some variations, what they do is they'll move to e3, and then they'll move the knight back to, like when he castles, I'll move the knight to e1, and then I'll start the onslaught on the king side. And then I'd actually castle queen side. And it would bring my a rook into the battle. He pushes his d pawn, protecting, and also opening up lines for his light squared bishop. I repel by a3. This is also a good move too, so if I ever wanted to castle queenside, I don't have to worry about my a-pawn getting captured. He moves back, keeping the pressure. Remember what we talked about? The threat is more important than actually the capture sometimes. People have to calculate that in, which it wastes time. And it gives you advantage. So I decide I'm going to castle kingside because I want to repel that bishop out. And it does. I made that bishop dance all the way back to where it belongs, back in his place. And then I go in for the kill for a4. I'm going to snap off that bishop and have 2 bishops to his 1. He castles. Remember we talked about when he castles, he brings his h rook to the f file so that it's protecting his f pawn and also his knight. And it prepares for the king onslaught. I take. I don't really much worry about that. One thing you can't do is doubt yourself. If you start a position like I brought my knight over there, you got to execute to the end. You don't waver, otherwise you'll get smashed. Takes my knight with his a pawn. I take the pawn, even though it brings the bishop in. I have to get some play. I can't let him totally take over the board with what he would have done is push his f pawn down, and he would have had total control on the king side. His next move would have been g5, and then h5, and it would have been a huge onslaught, and I would have been in trouble. Move my bishop to e. I know. Let's step back and take a look. Yes, he's got total central control right now. I have my pieces developed. He's got a huge king side attack. but he doesn't really, he needs to bring his rooks in. These pieces are not into play, which I actually have all my pieces in play, but they're back at home. And I can, what I gotta do is open up some of the central lines, bring my pieces in. I can do more free development. I have freer mobility than he does right now. And he starts, like we talked about, he's developing his knight to c6. I castle, bring my h-rook into the fight. Brings his bishop back. The reason he's doing that, you're wondering why. He's wasting, no, he's not wasting a move. He's allowing for the rook to come, to be opened up by like a knight d5. Sometimes they'll bring it back to e, and then open it up, and then they'll swing it maybe over, but that's very rare that they do that. So, I don't waste any time. I see that if he moves, I have a problem with his rook, so I pin his knight to his queen. And it gives me a little time. You see, he has to move. It gives me one tempo, which is the tempo that I need to get my pieces out. What I do is I find that this, see, the knight to h4 is a very good move. What it does two things. It attacks his light squared bishop, and it also opens up the battery onto the light squared bishop, onto the light squared, and I can maybe put it here, attacking his queen. You see that? So there's a lot of threats he has to take into consideration. He has to take into consideration the take of the knight, the take of the bishop, and the bishop to g4. He moves it back. He moves his bishop back. That's a good move. But it also allows me to take, and I open up his position. He takes. Do you see how that was a good move, but it wasn't a good move. He should have done something different than that, because now you see that he's got his G file is weak. And it's open. I can now emphasize on that. I can bring my bishop to h5, attacking his pawn, and I can take with my queen. And then I can also bring my knight to f5 and swing it over to h6, attacking the king at g8, and he'll have to move. He can't move here because of the threat of my queen coming down and checkmating him. And that's exactly what I do. I know you guys saw that, so. And he's bringing it, he's trying everything, he's trying to seal up his wound. But he should not have allowed that wound to happen to begin with. But things happen, but you can try to make the best of a situation if that happens to you. I go bang, because remember what we talked about? Knight, then I can send my queen down. But he tries to, he intercepts, he's trying to seal that off, but he moved into a pin. Remember we talked about pins? Pins are horrible to get into, especially when it's a valuable piece like a knight. But if we notice he opened up the queen, you see the queen attack, but I could trade queens and I'd actually be in a better position than him. I take with the knight, takes with the queen, see that? Queen takes. He's thinking that that's going to distract me from my thing, but I take with the queen. What I could have did was an intermediate move, before, they call it a guamp move. I could have played my knight to e7, attacking his king and making it move either to g7 or h8, then have taken. Because then I could have swung my knight down. When you're in a game, you got pressure, you got your queen just got taken. Sometimes it's hard to calculate that in. It's a habit, take back. Try not to let that happen. Think in the future. Okay, now we see, let's step back for a second and take a look. Remember how he had total central control? He still does with his pawns, but look, I have open, remember what I said about free mobility? I have free mobility, and I was able to use that advantage to clear out the majority of his pieces. Now I have a fighting chance. And all I gotta do is do an F pawn. You see, if I move it up here, if he takes, then I can take with my rook. Then he'll have a weak F pawn and H pawn, and his king's also totally bare because of the no pawn at the G file. So we always gotta look at those advantages. I play H4. That's a good move because it frees a spot up for my king to escape. It also allows, if I move my rook to E1, and then do a lift, and then over, I can pin his bishop. That's like 3 or 4 moves in the future. I'm probably going to push the pawn and attack. You'll see. Then he'll have to move away. But what he does is he tries to take. See, when you attack on the flank, try and, like your opponent attacks on the flank, attack in the center, because then that distracts them from their flank attack. Or if you're getting attacked on the flank, or you attack in the center. Okay, vice versa. Okay. I move all the way back to E2. Because the reason I move all the way back is if he plays here, it would have been a problem. I negated a lot of issues by moving all the way back. And I could also push my pawn with protection by my bishop. He stops. That's kind of a risky move, but it's a good move because it stops the attack of the bishop. But now the bishop has to guard 2 spots. And I can now push F3, and then I can push G4 and open up the position. See, that's exactly what I do. He pushes his pawn, he locks down. This is a great move because it stops any A file attack because of his rook and the pawn. Now it's 2 attackers to 1 defender. I mean, two defenders to 1 attacker. And it also stops the C push, and it would also bring it so that he won't have any double pawns anymore, which would be an advantage for him. But I keep with my idea, the attack of the king. I don't negate from that. If you have an idea, yet one thing that's hard to do, forget about one side of the board and focus on the side that you're attacking. Because they try to make you focus over here, waste time on your clock. Don't allow that, because then you get into time problems, and then with that you make mistakes. So focus on the attack. He takes with his H, like I thought he was going to. I take back. He pushes his pawn. He's getting space advantage, you see, on the king. But I also have 2 pawns, 2 pass pawns. The G pawn and the H pawn. And those guys are just going to roll up there like a tank, man. And devastate everything in their path. I'm also moving my king to F3. You're wondering why? I'm allowing my rooks now to come into the battle. Now that G rook, it was blocked by the king at G1, the F rook, can come to H1. And the A rook can come to G1 and protect 2 pawns. They always say a rook belongs behind a pawn, not in front of it. Remember that. If your opponent's in front of the pawn and it comes down to a pawn, place your rook behind his, and he can really never get his pawn to the 8th rank because his rook will be there. And then when he moves his rook, you snap it off, and the game's a draw. So remember that. He pushes on. He doesn't worry about the 2 guys that I have, and that was his problem. That was his downfall. Now I'm pushing her back, the little bishop. He goes, oops, sorry. A little bit ahead of myself. It moves all the way back. I push to G5. You're asking, whoa, what about the H? Remember why I pushed back? That right there. Also, I have a king. If he tries to push, I can put bishop. See that? And then I can move my king over. So everything's good. He brings his rook down, trying to double attack on my H5 pawn. But you'll see what I do. I push onward. I don't really mind about that because, see, it blunts his attack. He thought that he could double attack. I'd like do something like H1 and then he could take it. But I didn't. You got a plan. He brings his king to G7. And he's trying to prevent the push of the H pawn. Or he might even try to get into H6 to stop the two pawns. But I don't allow that to happen. I move my rook to H1 protection. Next move will probably be G1, and then I can start my push up the center. And what we talked about? We did do that. See? Like we talked about. Bring all the reinforcements in. All my pieces are in the fight. He's got one piece that's not doing anything. Even if he takes the pawn, it'll give me a chance to push my my rook, my pawn all the way to the G8 and queen. He moves his bishop. The reason he does that is he wants to bring, if I do queen, he wants to have the defense of the rook. You see that? But that's kind of a bad move because even if I do queen, I can get a rook, and I'd be two rooks and one bishop to a rook and a bishop. He's trying to double defend. I bring my rook to G because I see a fork. I see a skewer. Actually a fork. When I bring my rook to G6, it attacks the king and the bishop. The bishop has no defender, so I'll get a bishop. He moves the king. I snap off the bishop. True, I may lose that pawn, but I got a bishop. Brings his rook over to G8. Trying to gang up on the pawn. I don't let that happen. I move my pawn to H6 and am seeing that his king is totally without moves. I can bring my bishop, I can bring my pawn up, bring my bishop over and pin it to the king. M resigns. And God bless.